"Patrick, you're not going to sign these papers without reading everything carefully first, are you?" my mother said, pushing a brown leather folder across the dining table, her voice laden with that forced sweetness that always preceded her most elaborate manipulations. It was Christmas Eve. The table was set with Grandma's special china, scented candles scattered around the dining room, and the turkey was still browning in the oven. But something in the air didn't match the festive atmosphere my family had created. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his retirement watch on his wrist. "It's just a formality, son. The bank needs a co-signer with solid credit for his brother's loan. My name is Patrick, I'm 32 years old, and I just found out that my own family had turned Christmas dinner into a financial trap." My younger brother, Stephen, was sitting across the table, fiddling with his cell phone with that look of someone who already knew he was going to get what he wanted. Her wife, Amanda, methodically cut up food for my 6-year-old nephew, Mason, avoiding my gaze. "It's for Stephen's new store," Mom continued, tears already forming in the corners of her eyes. "You know how hard it is to get credit for small businesses these days." Hard. I looked at Stephen, who had just returned from a 2-week trip to Cancun, posting photos from 5-star resorts while I worked 70 hours a week at his technology consulting firm. "The deadline for approval is tight," Dad added, drumming his fingers on the table. "We need to submit the documents on Monday." Monday. That gave me exactly 3 days to sign a financial commitment that could destroy my future. As I flipped through the pages of the contract, fragments of memories began to fit together like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Mom's strange phone call last week, asking about my year-end bonus. Stephen's insistence that I come spend more time with the family during the holidays. Christmas dinner scheduled for a Thursday, when we traditionally always had it on a Saturday. $100,000 is a lot of money, I muttered, still processing the magnitude of what they were asking. "For someone in her position, it's a manageable amount," Stephen said for the first time that evening, putting down his cell phone. "You've always been the most financially responsible member of the family." Responsible. The word echoed in his mind like a bitter laugh. Responsible as in when he paid for his own college by working 3 different jobs? Responsible as in when Mom and Dad fully funded Stephen's business degree at a private university, while he racked up $50,000 in student loans? "I need to think about it," I said, closing the folder. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. I saw Mom and Stephen exchange a quick glance, the kind of silent communication 2 people develop when they're planning something together. "Think about what?" Stephen leaned forward, her voice taking on a firmer tone. "It's family, Patrick. Family helps family." That phrase. The same one I heard when Stephen needed money for a new car at 21. The same one when he wanted to open his first store, which went bankrupt in 8 months. The same one when Amanda got pregnant and they needed temporary help with medical expenses that turned into 2 years of payments. But while they continued with his rehearsed arguments, something interesting was happening in my mind. Instead of panic or anger, I felt a strange calmness come over me. Maybe it was because, unlike all the other times, I wasn't caught off guard. 2 weeks ago, I received an unexpected offer. A technology company in Seattle had offered me a director position with a salary that would double my current income. The offer included relocation assistance, a signing bonus, and immediate start date. I hadn't given a definitive answer yet, but my suitcase was already practically packed in the closet of my apartment. "All right," I finally said, putting the folder aside. "I'll think it over the weekend and give you an answer on Monday." The relief that crossed Stephen's face was almost comical. He thought he had one. If you're enjoying following how a family can turn a celebration into emotional blackmail, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how this story of family manipulation will unfold. Because what they didn't know was that he had already made his decision long before he sat down at that table. And when they found out what that decision was, well, let's just say that Monday would be very different from what they were imagining. During dessert, I watched Stephen with a clarity that only comes when we finally recognize a pattern that has always been there. He cut the chocolate cake Mom had prepared, the same one she made for all his birthdays, but never for mine, and talked excitedly about his plans for the new store. "It's going to be revolutionary," he said, gesturing with his fork. "A premium sporting goods store, but with a personalized experience. Virtual reality to test equipment, specialized personal shoppers." Every word came out of her mouth with the confidence of someone who never had to prove his worth, never had to fight for attention, never had to justify her dreams. Stephen had always been his golden child of the family. When we were 10 and 8 respectively, he broke the neighbor's window playing baseball, and I took the blame because I was the oldest and should have been supervising. When he failed math in high school, Dad hired a private tutor for $200 an hour. When I struggled with advanced physics, I got a lecture about applying myself more to my studies. College was just a continuation of the same pattern. While Stephen enjoyed his 4 years at Carolina State with everything paid for, dorm, food, books, even a generous allowance for social experiences, I worked 40 hours a week at a building supply warehouse to pay off his student loans. I vividly remember my graduation day. I came home expecting a small celebration, maybe a cake, a few relatives. Instead, I found Mom and Dad throwing a surprise party for Stephen, who had landed an unpaid internship at a marketing agency. "Patrick, I'm so glad you're here," Mom had said, barely glancing at my diploma. "Can you help your dad hang these banners for Stephen?" That night, I ate my celebratory pizza alone in my apartment, staring at the diploma that had cost me 5 years of my life and $50,000 in debt. Now, watching Stephen draw store layouts on a sheet of paper, I felt that same familiar pang of injustice. But this time, something had changed. This time, I was prepared. "The location is perfect," Stephen continued. "High-end shopping mall, ideal target audience. The only obstacle is that initial loan." Dad nodded gravely. $100,000 is no small amount of money, but with the right cosigner. All eyes turned to me again. "Patrick has always been so responsible with money," Amanda added for the first time in the conversation, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "I've never seen anyone so disciplined with budgets and investments." The irony was almost comical. Disciplined by necessity, not by choice. While Stephen spent his parents' money on designer clothes and travel, I learned to make detailed spreadsheets of every penny I earned. While he tried out different professional passions, photography, graphic design, digital marketing, sports consulting, I was building a solid career in technology because I couldn't afford to fail. "And it's a safe investment," Stephen continued, his eyes shining with that excitement I knew so well. The same excitement he had with the supplement store that closed in 6 months. The same with the app startup that never got off the ground. The same with the online personal training service that lasted exactly 3 weeks. But this time was different. This time, he had learned to involve the whole family in the scheme. "I've already talked to 3 suppliers," he continued, pulling papers from his briefcase. "The profit margins are excellent. Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour have already confirmed their interest in exclusive partnerships. Partnerships that probably existed only in her imagination, as always. And the timing is perfect," Dad added, as if he had rehearsed it. "The sports equipment market is booming, especially after the pandemic." Mom nodded vigorously. "People are more conscious about health and fitness. It's a trend that's here to stay." I listened to each argument with the patience of someone who already knows the script. He had clearly spent weeks preparing this presentation, each with her part rehearsed, every objection anticipated and answered. Except for one small detail. 2 months ago, when I received the proposal from the company in Seattle, I did extensive research on Stephen. Not out of malice, but out of prudence. I discovered that he had attempted 3 loan applications in the last 6 months, all denied due to poor credit history and unresolved previous business deals. I also discovered that his last store still owed $16,000 to suppliers, information he had apparently omitted from his family. Even more interesting, I discovered that he had illegally accessed my credit report through her company, who worked at a bank. A federal violation that could result in a fine of up to $5,000 and possible imprisonment. "Patrick," Mom said softly, pulling me back into the conversation. "You're very quiet. What are you thinking?" What I was thinking was that in 72 hours, I would be boarding a plane to Seattle. That his apartment was already being sublet to a coworker. That his resignation letter was already signed and sealed, just waiting for the right moment to be delivered. What I was thinking was that they had seriously underestimated her victim. "I'm processing everything," I replied calmly. "It's an important decision." Stephen leaned forward, her expression subtly changing to something more predatory. "Processing what, exactly?" "It's family, Patrick. When I was building my first company, you didn't support me. When Amanda and I got married, you barely showed up at the wedding. The accusations began as they always did, distorting the truth until I looked like the villain. I didn't support her first company because he asked me to lend her $15,000 without any business plan. I barely showed up at his wedding because he purposely scheduled it on the same weekend as my most important presentation at the company, knowing I couldn't miss it. And now, Stephen continued, his voice taking on that tone of misunderstood martyr, when I finally have a real opportunity, a chance to build something lasting for my family, my own brother hesitates to help me. The manipulation was so obvious it was insulting. But I could see that it worked perfectly with our parents, who nodded in agreement. Stephen is right, Dad said, her voice carrying the paternal authority that always made me feel like a child being scolded. Family means being there for the moments that matter. Moments that matter. Like my graduation, which they missed because Stephen had a baseball game on the same day. Like his promotion to regional director, which they celebrated with dinner at the cheapest restaurant in town because it was cozier. Like his 30th birthday, which he completely forgot because it coincided with Stephen's debut in a community theater play. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I kept my expression neutral and nodded thoughtfully. You're right, I finally said. Family is important. That's why I need to be absolutely sure before I sign anything. The tension in the room eased slightly. Stephen smiled, thinking he had one. What he didn't know was that while he was devising this plan to extort $100,000 from me, I had devised my own plan. A plan that would begin to unfold on Monday morning, just when he expected to see me at the bank signing those papers. But instead of being at the bank, I would be 10,000 feet in the air, flying toward a new life where no one could use emotional family blackmail to manipulate him. And when he found out, well, that would be a conversation he would have to have with the bank all by himself. As Mom served coffee and Stephen continued to talk about his grand visions for the future, I smiled inwardly. They thought they knew Patrick, the responsible and predictable older brother. On Monday, they would meet a completely different version. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Stephen and a 5-minute audio message from Mom explaining how I was breaking the whole family's heart with my hesitation. But it was his text message that really caught my attention. Patrick, I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Stephen has already signed contracts with suppliers based on this loan. If his name isn't on the list on Monday, he could face lawsuits. Lawsuits. Stephen had spent money that didn't even exist yet. I called my accountant, David, who had known my family for years. When I explained the situation, the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Patrick, he finally said, co-signing $100,000 for someone with Stephen's credit history is like throwing money into a fire. If he fails to pay, and considering his track record, he's likely to fail, you'll be responsible for every penny. What if she's already made commitments based on the loan? That makes the situation even worse. It means he's operating irresponsibly, and his would be dragged into a financial hole that could take decades to climb out of. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a sheet of paper. On one side, I wrote consequences of signing. On the other, consequences of not signing. The first list filled half a page. Total financial responsibility, risk of bankruptcy, ruined credit, years of monthly payments that could consume half my income. The second list had only 3 items: family pressure, emotional blackmail, constant guilt trips. As I weighed the pros and cons, my phone rang. It was my friend Lisa, who worked in recruitment for tech companies. Patrick, how are you? I heard you got an interesting offer from Seattle. I frowned. How did you hear about that? Small world. The company called me asking for professional references about his. Obviously, I said wonderful things. But it made me curious, is he really considering the move? My stomach knotted. If Lisa knew about Seattle, it meant that other people in his professional circle knew too. What if it reached his family's ears? It's just a possibility, I replied cautiously. Patrick, can I give you some unsolicited advice? That company has an excellent reputation. The salary they're offering is 40% above the local market standard. If I were his, I wouldn't think twice. In the second drawer of the dresser, I found the folder that I had put away weeks ago. Inside were printouts of all the emails from the Seattle company, including the formal offer, a salary of $160,000 a year, a relocation bonus of $25,000, immediate start. It was more than enough to start over from scratch, far from the toxic dynamics of his family. My phone rang again. This time it was Amanda, Stephen's wife. "Patrick," his voice sounded tense, almost desperate. "I need to talk to you in private. It's about the loan." I agreed to meet her at a cafe near my apartment. When she arrived, she looked like she had aged 5 years since yesterday's dinner. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred the sugar into her coffee. "Patrick, you can't sign those papers," she said quietly, looking around nervously. "Why?" "Because Stephen didn't tell you the whole truth. The old store still owes $16,000 to suppliers. He had to close it because he was embezzling money from the cash register to cover online sports bets." My blood ran cold. Betting. It started small, but it escalated quickly. In the last 6 months, he lost almost $30,000. I only found out because the bank sent an overdraft notice to our house. Amanda pulled an envelope from her pocket. "Here are bank statements from the last few months. If you sign as a co-signer, it's not just the risk of the store going bankrupt. It's the risk that he uses the money to cover gambling debts." I examined the documents with growing horror. Transfers of $5,000, $8,000, $3,500 to sports betting sites. Withdrawals from casino ATMs. Payments to loan sharks I didn't even know existed. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because he's planning to use you as collateral and then declare personal bankruptcy. I heard him talking to a lawyer about asset protection. If the store fails, he'll transfer everything to my name and leave you holding the bill." The betrayal was even deeper than I had imagined. It wasn't just about family favoritism or emotional pressure. It was a deliberate financial trap, where I would be the only one harmed. "Amanda, you need to get out of this situation," I said, handing back the papers. "I know. I've already consulted a divorce lawyer. But first I needed to make sure that it wasn't his fate to be dragged down with us." After Amanda left, I stayed at the cafe for another hour, processing everything I had discovered. With each passing minute, I felt a transformation taking place inside me. For 32 years, I had been the responsible older brother, always putting the family's needs before my own. Always finding ways to justify my parents' favoritism, always forgiving his manipulations. But this was no longer about family differences or sibling jealousy. This was premeditated financial crime. I returned home with a clear purpose for the first time in weeks. I called the Seattle company. "Hello, this is Patrick Morrison. I'd like to expedite the process of hiring me. When can I start?" "Patrick, that's great news. We can finalize the paperwork by Tuesday if his availability for a video call tomorrow. When could he move?" "How about next week?" "Perfect. We'll send the contracts and relocation information today." After the call, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I was able to breathe deeply. That afternoon, I started making strategic phone calls. First to his apartment landlord, explaining that I would need to break my lease for professional reasons. Then to a moving company to appraise my belongings. Each call made me feel lighter, as if I were literally breaking the chains that bound me to a life I had never really chosen. At the end of the day, I received a text message from Stephen. "I talked to Mom. She said you're still processing the decision." "Patrick, there's nothing to process. Family helps family. Period." I looked at the message and for the first time, felt neither anger nor guilt. I felt sorry for Stephen had spent his entire life believing that people were obligated to save him from his own choices. He had never learned that actions have consequences, that responsibility cannot be outsourced. And tomorrow, when he discovered that his plan had failed completely, he would finally learn that lesson. But I wouldn't be there to teach him. I would be 3,000 miles away, starting a new life where no one could use me as a safety net for her irresponsible decisions. As the sun set behind my apartment window, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Stephen thought he had me cornered, that he had created a situation where I would have no choice but to sign those papers. What he didn't know was that I had already made my choice weeks ago. And on Monday, when he was waiting for me at the bank, he would find out exactly what that choice was. The real question wasn't whether I would sign the loan. The real question was whether he would have the courage to tell our parents that he had lost $30,000 gambling and planned to use his name to cover his debts. Something told me that Monday would be a very interesting day for the Morrison family. On Monday morning, While Stephen was probably waking up anxiously awaiting our meeting at the bank, I was at the Boston airport checking in for the 9:45 flight to Seattle. But that was only in my mental plan. In reality, I called him at 7 a.m. "Stephen, I need to postpone our meeting at the bank," I said, forcing nervousness into my voice. Something came up at work. An unexpected audit that could affect my bonus. The silence on the other end was tense. "Patrick, you can't be serious. I've already confirmed with the bank, with the suppliers, with everyone." I know. But if his bonus is affected, it could compromise his ability to be a co-signer. I need a few days to work it out. It was a perfect lie because it contained elements of truth that he could verify. More importantly, it fed her growing paranoia without arousing real suspicion. A few days. Her voice rose an octave. "Patrick, I've already signed contracts. People are waiting for the money." "What people, Stephen? I thought the loan was for store equipment." Another silence. Longer this time. It is for equipment. But I had to make some advance payments to secure the best suppliers." Advance payments. For her gambling debts, no doubt. That afternoon, I got a call from David, my accountant, with information I had requested on Friday. "Patrick, you'll want to hear this sitting down," he said. I did some research on his brother's financial situation. In addition to the $16,000 Amanda mentioned, I found another $22,000 in undeclared debts. "What do you mean?" "Credit cards in the name of the previous store, personal loans using equipment as collateral, even debts to registered loan sharks. The guy is buried in debt. What if he gets the $100,000 loan? He'll use it to plug the most urgent holes, but with his gambling habits, he'll probably be in the same situation in 6 months. Only this time, you'll be on the front line paying the bills." Hanging up the phone was like finishing the last adjustments to a complex puzzle. Each piece now showed the complete picture. Stephen wasn't just being irresponsible. He was using our family as a safety net for an addiction problem that had spiraled completely out of control. On Tuesday, Mom showed up at my office unannounced. "Patrick," she said, her eyes red from a night of crying, "I need to talk to you about Stephen." I took her to an empty conference room. She sat down with the posture of someone carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "He told me about his gambling problems," she admitted, the words coming out like painful confessions. "We didn't know, Patrick. If we had known." "Did you know he was spending money he didn't have?" "We thought it was just inexperience with business. Young entrepreneurs always struggle in the beginning." Young entrepreneurs. Stephen was 29 years old. "Mom, co-signing this loan won't solve his problem. It'll just give him more money to gamble." She leaned forward, grabbing my hand desperately. "He promised he'd stopped. He said he'd learned his lesson. And the store. Patrick, it's her last chance. If he doesn't get this money, he could end up in jail." Jail. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. "What aren't you telling me?" Mom sighed deeply. "Some of his creditors aren't conventional people. Stephen has received threats. They said that if he doesn't pay by the end of the month." The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. The loan wasn't just about a store or gambling debts. It was about physical survival. "Why didn't you come to him about this from the beginning?" "Because we knew he would say no. He's always been so proper. So responsible. He never understood that sometimes family needs to support each other in extreme situations." Proper. Responsible. As if those were negative characteristics. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. I called a private investigator I had met during a consulting project for an insurance company. Mark Rodriguez, a former police officer with 20 years of experience in financial crimes. "Mark, I need detailed information on illegal gambling activities in Boston. Specifically, loan sharks operating in the metropolitan area." "Is this about you?" "It's about his brother. And I need to know exactly what kind of people he's involved with. I can have preliminary information by Thursday. It'll cost $1,500. Done." On Wednesday, Stephen started calling compulsively. 17 missed calls when I got home from work. The voicemail he left at 10 p.m. was revealing. "Patrick, I know you're avoiding my calls, but you need to understand the gravity of the situation. It's not just about me. It's about Mason, too. Do you want your nephew to grow up without a father because his uncle didn't want to help when he needed it most? Using Mason as emotional blackmail was the point of no return. I called him back immediately. Stephen, stop using his son to manipulate me. I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm desperate. These people aren't playing around, Patrick. If I don't get the money, then go to the police. The police? Do you think it's that simple? These people know where Amanda works. They know what time Mason gets out of school. Do you really think a complaint to the police will solve this? The fear in her voice was genuine. For the first time in years, Stephen was being completely honest with me. But belated honesty doesn't erase years of manipulation and irresponsibility. Stephen, I'll be blunt with you. I'm not going to co-sign this loan. The silence that followed was so deep that I thought he had hung up. So you're going to let her family be destroyed because of his pride? It's not pride. It's survival. Co-signing this loan won't solve her problems. It will just transfer the consequences to me. Patrick, please. But, I interrupted, I'll help in a different way. A way that will actually solve the problem. On Thursday, Mark sent me a report that made his blood run cold. Stephen owed money to Viktor Kozlov, a Russian loan shark known for his extremely violent methods. 3 people who owed Kozlov money had been hospitalized in the last 2 years. This information completely changed his strategy. If you're following how a familiar situation can spiral into something much more dangerous than we imagined, subscribe to the channel to see how this web of lies, blackmail, and real threats will unfold in the next few minutes. Friday arrived with a revelation that would change everything once again. Amanda called me in tears. Patrick, Stephen is missing. He didn't come home last night. His cell phone goes straight to voicemail. My stomach dropped. Do you think? I don't know what to think. I got a strange call this morning. A man with a foreign accent asking if I knew where my husband was. As Amanda spoke, I looked out the window of my apartment at the suitcases already packed in the corner of the bedroom. In 18 hours, I would be on a flight to Seattle. But now, for the first time since I had started this plan, I wasn't sure I could just disappear. Not while Stephen might be in real danger. The last call of the night came from a number I didn't recognize. Hello. Patrick Morrison? The voice had an accent I couldn't place. Are you Stephen Morrison's brother? My heart stopped. Who is this? Someone who has information about his brother. He mentioned that you might be willing to discuss certain financial obligations. The call lasted only 30 seconds, but it was enough to understand that my carefully crafted plan had become secondary to a situation that could cost my brother his life. The next morning, Saturday, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I canceled my flight to Seattle. Not because Stephen deserved my help, but because, despite everything, he was still my brother. More importantly, Mason deserved to have a father, even if he was a flawed one. But that didn't mean I was going to co-sign the loan and become financially responsible for his addictions for the rest of my life. It meant I was going to resolve the situation in a way that neither of them expected. A way that would require Stephen to face the consequences of his actions, but that would also ensure her physical safety. And when it was all over, when the dust settled, I would still have my ticket to Seattle. Only this time, I would be leaving with a clear conscience and the certainty that I had done the right thing. Stephen thought he knew her. He thought he could manipulate her using fear, guilt, and emotional blackmail. On Monday, he would find out that he was completely wrong about who she really was. On Sunday morning, Stephen showed up at my apartment door. Alive, but clearly shaken. Her appearance was that of someone who hadn't slept for 48 hours, with deep dark circles under her eyes and wrinkled clothes. Patrick, we need to talk, he said, pushing the door open before I could react. You don't understand the gravity of the situation. Oh, but I understand perfectly. I closed the door behind his and turned with a smile that made him take a step back. I understand that you owe Viktor Kozlov $30,000. I understand that you used Amanda's bank access to check my bonus illegally. And I understand that you plan to file for personal bankruptcy after I co-signed the loan. The blood drained from Stephen's face. How did you? Mark Rodriguez, I said, throwing the investigator's report on the coffee table. Former police officer specializing in financial crimes. He discovered some very interesting things about her activities over the last 6 months. Stephen leafed through the pages with trembling hands. Each document was irrefutable proof: bank records, transactions with gambling sites, communications with loan sharks, even recordings of phone calls where he discussed using his name as collateral. Patrick, I can explain. No need to explain anything. I pulled out my laptop and sat down comfortably in the armchair. Actually, you're going to sit there and listen while I explain exactly what's going to happen now. Her arrogance had completely disappeared. For the first time in our lives, Stephen looked at me with something I had never seen before: genuine respect mixed with absolute terror. First thing, I began, clicking on a folder on the desktop. You can't do that. Amanda didn't do anything. He can't do that. Amanda didn't do anything. She illegally accessed his credit report using bank credentials. That's a federal crime. I clicked on the second folder. But here's the interesting part. I also found out that Viktor Kozlov is being investigated for money laundering. The FBI is very interested in his financial activities. Stephen stood up abruptly. Patrick, you don't know what kind of people you're messing with. Oh, but I do. I smiled again. Mark has excellent contacts in the police department. Kozlov was arrested last night. It was a coordinated operation involving multiple federal agencies. The look of relief that crossed Stephen's face lasted exactly 3 seconds, until he realized what this really meant. With Kozlov off the streets, he is no longer in physical danger, I continued calmly. But you also no longer have the excuse of the threat to emotionally blackmail me. Patrick. I'm not finished. I opened the third folder. Here are copies of all his financial records for the last 5 years. It's interesting to note that he has a consistent pattern. He receives money from his family, spends it on gambling, fails in business, repeats the cycle. I showed him the detailed spreadsheet I had prepared. Over the past 5 years, our parents have given him a total of $147,000 in loans that have never been repaid. Amanda contributed another $22,000. I contributed $16,000 for various emergencies. That doesn't prove anything. It doesn't. I laughed loudly. Stephen, you have a serious gambling addiction. And in recent years, you've turned our entire family into his unwitting financiers. That's while I was still being the nice brother. I got up and walked to the window. But you know what changed? I found out that you didn't see me as a brother. You saw me as a personal bank with emotional blackmail as interest. Patrick, you've always been the intellectual favorite of the family. Favorite. I turned quickly. Stephen, he got a car for graduating. I got a card with $50. He had his college tuition paid for. I went into debt for $50,000. He fails at business and always has our family as his safety net. I built a career on my own, and now you think his money is family property. I opened the fourth folder. But here's the icing on the cake. Last night, I sent a complete copy of all this evidence to our parents, uncles, cousins, and anyone else who was present at that manipulative dinner. The horror that crossed Stephen's face was genuine. You can't be serious. The email had a simple title: Why I Won't Co-Sign Stephen's Loan, Complete Evidence. I included everything. Her gambling debts, the illegal access to my information, the bankruptcy plan, even the recordings where you call our parents useful idiots. Stephen slumped in his chair as if he'd been punched in the stomach. You know what the first response I got was? I continued relentlessly. Uncle Frank. Apparently, you also tried to convince him to lend you money 2 months ago. He didn't know about her gambling, but now he understands why he was so desperate. My phone rang. Mom. Hello. Patrick. Her voice was hoarse from crying. We just read his email. Is all of this true? I looked directly at Stephen as I answered. Every word, Mom. Every document has been verified by professional investigators. His father wants to talk to Stephen immediately. He's here with me. I'll send him home in a few minutes. I hung up and turned to my brother, who looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Stephen, you have 2 options, I said, my voice taking on a tone of finality. First, Enter a gambling addiction rehabilitation program today. Pay back every penny you owe the family with a payment plan that I will personally oversee. And never ask me for money again in your life. And the second option? There is no second option. I smiled coldly. Because if you don't take the first one, I'm sending copies of all these documents to the Human Resources Department of every company you've ever worked for, to every bank in town, and to every person in our social network. Stephen was silent for several long minutes, processing her complete defeat. One last thing, I added, opening the last folder. Here is my resignation letter, already signed and dated for tomorrow. And here is her flight confirmation to Seattle, departing on Tuesday. Are you still going to Seattle? I've always been going to Seattle. The difference is that now I'm going with a clear conscience, knowing that you can no longer use her family as a safety net for her destructive decisions. When Stephen left my apartment 20 minutes later, he looked like a defeated man. But for the first time in years, I felt completely free. My phone exploded with messages in the following minutes. Uncle Frank offering support. Cousin Jennifer asking why I never told her about the situation before. Even Amanda, sending a simple message, "Thank you for exposing the truth. I need to rebuild my life too." Most importantly, Dad called. "Patrick," she said, her voice laden with a humility I had never heard before, "your father is very proud of you. You should have done this years ago." As the sun set through my apartment window, I looked at my packed bags and smiled. In 48 hours, I would be starting a new life in Seattle. But unlike the original plan, I was now leaving as a winner, not a fugitive. Stephen had tried to use me as his financial plan B, but he ended up discovering that I had my own plan A. And my plan A never included being the safety net for someone who saw me only as a walking bank with feelings. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. Tomorrow would be his last day at the company, but also the first day of his true independence. Stephen thought he knew her. He thought he could manipulate her using our family history and emotional blackmail. On Tuesday, when her plane took off from Boston, he would finally understand that he had seriously underestimated who she really was. And when he looked in the mirror, perhaps for the first time in his life, he would see not the victim of circumstances he always believed himself to be, but the one truly responsible for every destructive choice he had made. Justice, I discovered, isn't just about punishing those who hurt us. It's about ensuring he faces the truth about himself, unable to blame anyone else for the consequences of his own actions. 6 months later, sitting in my new office in Seattle overlooking Puget Sound, I received a message from Amanda. Stephen has voluntarily entered rehab. He lost the store, but he's paying off his debts as he promised. Mason asks when he can visit Uncle Patrick in Seattle. I smiled, remembering the Monday I left Boston. Stephen had shown up at the airport, not to stop me, but to apologize genuinely for the first time in our adult lives. "You were right about everything," he said, his eyes swollen from crying. "I made you victims of my problems. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm going to get better." My new position as Chief Technology Officer brought not only double the salary, but responsibilities that really mattered. Our team developed a financial management app specifically for people in recovery from addiction, a poetic irony that did not go unnoticed. Mom called weekly now, real conversations about life, no longer disguised requests for financial help. Dad sent a handwritten letter, the first in my adult life, admitting he had failed as a father by allowing Stephen to exploit me for so long. What was most surprising was discovering that other relatives had been victims of Stephen over the years. My revealing email opened the floodgates to similar stories, creating a family support network that had never existed before. Uncle Frank called me last week. "Patrick, her courage in exposing the truth has saved our family from years of further manipulation. Stephen is genuinely changing, but that was only possible because she said no when it was necessary." On Friday, I received an unexpected message from Stephen. "I've completed 90 days without gambling. I got a job as a salesman at a sporting goods store." Ironic, I know. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just wanting you to know that her actions saved me from myself." He attached a photo, he and Mason in a park, both smiling genuinely. For the first time, I saw my brother take on paternal responsibility without drama or manipulation. My apartment in Seattle became a refuge for other professionals who faced similar family situations. I discovered that my experience could help people stuck in toxic dynamics find the courage to set healthy boundaries. The real victory wasn't Stephen losing the store or facing his consequences. It was realizing that genuine family love doesn't require financial or emotional self-sacrifice. True family supports mutual growth, not parasitism disguised as her loyalty. Today, when I look out my office window at the snow-capped mountains, I don't feel anger about the past. I feel gratitude. Stephen tried to use me as her financial safety net, but he ended up freeing me to build the life I always deserved. The best revenge really is the success his manipulators never imagined possible. If you faced emotional blackmail from family or know someone stuck in toxic relationships, leave her experience in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about how setting boundaries transforms lives and frees people to reach their true potential. Sometimes the greatest kindness we can offer someone is to refuse to be complicit in their self-destruction.